So the Bluboo D5 Pro is a very cheap Mi Mix 2S clone, but is this phone worth the money you pay for it? Let's find out in the full review. Alright, so starting with build quality for the Bluboo D5 Pro, I gotta say that I like a lot about the build quality, but there's a lot I don't like as well. So the first thing I like is this red. I'm a fan of red, and I like the red color on the back and the red on the front. It really makes this phone nice, and I know some people think it's tacky, and you know what, it can be to some people, but to someone like me, I really like the color red, so I'm a huge fan of this color. The things I don't like, well, so let's keep on going with the things I like. The bezels, well, so the red bezels here are actually not too big, which is actually decent, but that comes with the downside, because the red bezels are not all the bezels you get on the phone. In addition to the red bezels, you get this silver chromed bezel that kind of, curves outward, and that adds a good, like, let's say 2-3 millimeters to each side of the bezel, side and the top and the bottom. So if you just had the red bezel, so for example, you see I'm covering it with my finger, the red bezels are actually pretty slim. But when you add the silver parts, you can see that it adds, like this bezel here is a good 4 millimeters thick, which is unsightly, and it doesn't look nice. The other thing about this chrome bezel that makes it not very nice is how heavy it gets. This phone is very heavy. This phone is only 5.2 inches. It's a 5.2 inch 18:9 phone, and it's really not that big, but it does feel very heavy because of this, like this chrome edge here is like solid metal. So that's probably one of the reasons why this thing is very heavy. But it does feel fairly okay in the hand because it's curved. It's curved here, it's curved on the edge, and it's curved here as well. So all these things make this a very decent phone to hold in the hand, even though it's heavy and it can get kind of ugly. So you do have the camera down at the bottom right, which in my opinion is not really that big an issue. And finally on the back, you have a design by Bluboo, and honestly the back here, if people didn't know that this was a Bluboo phone, they would think it is a pretty high-end device, except minus this chrome bezels, of course. And then you have the camera, the fingerprint sensor, and the LED flash also. Hey, look what we got here. We got a headphone jack. And on the other side, we also have a micro USB and 2 speaker grills, but there is only 1 speaker here. All right, let's look at the display here. I'm surprised by how good this display is, considering this is practically a 720p display at most. And the display here is good. It's an IPS LCD. The colors are very good. As you can see, you're going to see Spider-Man's suit in a little bit. You're going to see that the red and the blue are very nicely saturated, and it really makes the display look very nice. The detail is actually decent. I mean, yes, it is a 720p at most display, but I gotta say that the way this thing looks makes it look very decent. And as you can see, the Spider-Man suit, very nice saturated reds, very nice blues, and the bokeh effect's pretty good also. I really like how this display looks, and it's very good for pretty much anything you want to do. You want to play games, you want to watch TV, you want to scroll through the internet, you want to read some news. This is going to be a good display for you. But the one area where I see this display, failing is the maximum brightness. So this is already at maximum brightness, and to be honest, it's fairly difficult to see in bright sunlight. Almost impossible sometimes if you're in certain situations. So that's probably one of the biggest downsides to the display. It does not get very bright. Let's talk about the speakers here. The speakers here are average at best. The audio quality is not super great. There isn't any bass at all pretty much, and the audio quality itself is not very clear. Sometimes you do hear some distortion. The one thing that's weird is the volume steps. If you go to minimum volume, it's actually almost as loud as the maximum volume, or the difference really isn't that big, which can be annoying because you want to listen to something softly, you don't want to disturb other people. It's actually fairly difficult on this phone. So I'll give you a sample of audio from God of War 4.
We didn't know he belonged to anyone.
He doesn't. He's my friend.
The boy was following my command.
Then help fix this. Hold here, please. Hold, I said. He's losing blood. The last of his kind in all the realm, and you shoot him. You needed food?
Target practice.
Target practice.
I'm so sorry.
Keep that pressure on. The blame is mine. I should have kept a closer eye.
Will he die?
I will not let him. You, the arrow...
All right, let's talk about battery life here. This has a 2700 milliamp hour battery combined with a MTK 6737, which is not known as the most power efficient. And to be honest, battery life here really isn't that great. I could get maybe 4 hours of screen on time web browsing, playing some games and watching some YouTube. So really not that great battery life, and you don't have quick charge either. So this phone is definitely not for those of you who need insane battery like me. Even if you're someone who uses their phone more than average, the phone is probably not going to satisfy you. All right, let's talk about software and performance here. I gotta say that this phone is not super fast. The MTK 6737 does have trouble keeping up. If you're doing basic stuff like swiping, I do have Google Now Launcher on here. It actually feels okay. Opening the app drawer, swiping down, going to settings, all of that is decent, but where you start seeing slowdowns is once you start launching apps. So for example, let's start by launching Chrome. That actually wasn't too bad. It has been slower in the past. Of course, I just cleared all the RAM, so there's that. And let's try something else that's heavier. For example, let's try Google Play Newsstand. And as you can see, there was a little bit of lag there when you're trying to launch it. Now let's try something lighter like Reddit or Relay. And as you can see, there is a decent pause when you're using it. So something like that, you will see a pause when you're opening stuff. It's definitely not as fast as Snapdragon 625, so that is definitely one place where you do see slowdowns. There is 3 gigs of RAM, but I'm surprised by how often apps reload in this phone, even with 3 gigabytes of RAM, which is fairly surprising because 3 gigs of RAM should be enough for okay multitasking, but sometimes your apps do start reloading if you open too many. Especially if you open more than 6 or 7 apps, then you start seeing apps reloading, which I think might be due to the OS using up way too much RAM. Alright, let's talk about gaming here. This phone surprisingly cannot play very intense games. I was expecting it to be able to since the resolution was so low, but here, if you're playing something very intense, for example like Asphalt, you do start seeing lag even though there is 3 gigabytes of RAM. If you want to play something that's less intense, for example, Crossy Road, that does work fairly well. For example, you can see me playing it here, and it works well. But the problem is if you're playing something more intense, then you do start seeing lag coming out here and there. This should be good for pretty much anything light. For example, Candy Crush, Crossy Road, stuff like that. So mostly no problems for light stuff. All right, let's talk network connectivity. Here, the network connectivity is actually decent. As you can see, we have 3 network bands and 5 LTE, so that's actually pretty decent. Here we have 850, 900, and 2000, or aka 2100. So if you are in the USA or Canada, you will get 3G, which is nice. But for LTE bands, you got 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 20, which really is not enough for those of us in the USA or Canada who want to use it. If you are in Canada and you are on routers, this phone will work. But if you are in the USA, it will not work very well. I mean, you still get 3G, but that's really, I would rather you get a phone with full connectivity than something like this. Wi-Fi connectivity is pretty good. GPS jumps around a little bit, so pretty standard stuff for a cheap phone like this. Alright, so camera quality here ranges from decent to bad. There are some pictures where the detail is actually fairly decent and the color reproduction is not bad. It's not amazing color reproduction, but it's pretty good. But there are some other areas where you can see the camera quality really goes down, detail goes down, and the big problem I see with this camera is if you take something that's too close to the camera or moves too fast, for example my dog, you will start seeing some blur introduced into the photo. And sometimes you will see that pictures will start blurring out, for example, right here. However, I will say that you can take some pretty decent photos. For example, take a look at these macro shots. They're actually quite clear, quite detailed, and the color reproduction is pretty decent. So I gotta say that if you want to take photos, you are able to. It's just not super duper easy to do so. The HDR mode here actually works fairly well. It works well in areas with very high dynamic range. And in those areas, you will start seeing that the HDR really kicks in and really makes the photos look better. If you're looking at low light photos, they're not great. Of course, there's going to be a lot of noise, there's going to be a lot of grain in them, and it really doesn't look that great. Front-facing camera is pretty bad, and the video quality here surprised me by how bad it was. It looks worse than 720p. Let me put it that way. That's something that I haven't seen in a long time. Such a bad video camera. It's good enough for like Skype maybe, but if you're taking video of something to show to your friends or post on Facebook, it's gonna be very, very bad quality. Alright, so what are my thoughts on the Bluboo D5 Pro? The build quality of this is decent. I mean, it feels decent. It's fairly heavy, but the bezels are pretty big. I like the red color, but it sadly, again, is hampered by the bezel size. The display is good. The audio is barely average. The battery life is average at best, and the performance is not that great. Connectivity-wise, it's a tiny bit better than some other phones you might get, and camera quality is actually not too bad in some areas, but the video quality is pretty bad. So all in all, I have to say that the Bluboo D5 Pro is not a very good phone, even for an entry-level phone. However, the price for this phone is about $125, and at that price, you can get the Redmi 5A, which is a lot better than this phone for about $93, $95. And if you want, you can get the China Mobile A3s, which is $65, which is almost half the price of this Bluboo D5 Pro, and that will be a much better option than this. So yeah, I don't really recommend you get this phone at all, sadly. So let me know what you think in the comments down below about the Bluboo D5 Pro. I would love to hear your comments. Be sure to hit like and subscribe and hit that little bell icon beside the subscribe button. Be sure to check out my giveaway in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.